Welcome to Postcard English Stories, the podcast where real-life stories help you improve your English and expand your heart. Today we invite you to explore the inspiring journey of one of the most humble and influential leaders of our time, Pope Francis. From his childhood in Buenos Aires to becoming the first Jesuit pope in history, this is a story of courage, compassion, and quiet strength. Whether you are learning English or simply looking for inspiration, this story will stay with you. Let's begin. Part 1. A humble beginning in Buenos Aires. Let's go back in time, to Buenos Aires, Argentina, in the year 1936. On December 17th of that year, in a modest home in the Flores neighborhood, a baby named Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born to a working-class family. His father, Mario José Bergoglio, was an Italian immigrant who worked as a railway accountant. His mother, Regina Maria Savori, was a dedicated homemaker and deeply religious woman. Jorge was the eldest of 5 siblings, and their upbringing was filled with warmth, simplicity, and traditional values. The Bergoglio family was not wealthy. They lived modestly, but they were rich in something else: love, respect, and strong moral principles. Jorge's parents taught him early the importance of honesty, compassion, and responsibility. These values would become the foundation of his character for the rest of his life. As a child, Jorge was quiet, observant, and thoughtful. He was not the loudest in the group, but he was always paying attention, listening, learning, and reflecting. He loved reading books and had a deep curiosity about the world. His favorites were stories about science, history, and especially the lives of the saints. Like many boys in Argentina, Jorge loved football, or soccer, as some call it. He was a fan of San Lorenzo, a popular football club in Buenos Aires. But even though he enjoyed games with friends, he was also different. While other kids might dream of fame or riches, Jorge was drawn to silence, study, and spiritual life. In high school, Jorge showed an early interest in science. He studied chemistry and even went on to earn a diploma as a chemical technician. For a short time, he worked in a food laboratory. He was intelligent and capable. His future in science looked promising. But inside him, something deeper was stirring. Despite his academic success, Jorge felt a spiritual longing that science could not satisfy. He often visited churches, prayed regularly, and felt a growing desire to serve others. Eventually, he began to feel a strong call to religious life, a quiet voice inside that urged him to dedicate his life to God and to people in need. At the age of 21, Jorge entered the seminary and later joined the Society of Jesus, a Catholic order known as the Jesuits. This was a profound decision. The Jesuits are famous for their discipline, intellectual tradition, and commitment to social justice. Jorge admired those values, and he chose to embrace them fully. However, soon after beginning his training, Jorge fell seriously ill with pneumonia. He became so sick that part of one lung had to be removed. It was a frightening experience, especially for someone so young. But rather than becoming bitter, Jorge saw the experience as a turning point. He later said that illness taught him compassion. It allowed him to feel the pain of others more deeply. That sense of shared suffering would later become one of the cornerstones of his mission. During his years of formation, Jorge continued to grow intellectually and spiritually. He studied philosophy, theology, and pastoral care. He also taught high school literature and psychology, helping young people think critically and compassionately. He didn't seek attention. He didn't chase titles. Instead, he quietly led by example, always choosing simplicity over luxury, humility over pride, and service over status. Little did he know then, the journey that started in the quiet streets of Flores would one day take him to the highest role in the Catholic Church, as the Pope of the people, loved by millions, and respected by people of all faiths. Part 2. A Voice for the Forgotten. After years of dedication and formation, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was ordained a priest in 1969. His journey of service had officially begun, not in grand cathedrals or prestigious positions, but in classrooms, slums, and among people who struggled to survive each day. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Father Bergoglio had risen through the Jesuit leadership in Argentina. He became a provincial superior of the Jesuits and later rector of the seminary, where young men were preparing for priesthood. Yet even as he moved into leadership roles, he never lost touch with the people. He believed that a leader's strength lies not in their status, but in their closeness to those they serve. In 1992, he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires. Then, in 1998, he became the archbishop, a role that made him responsible for the spiritual life of one of the largest and most complex cities in South America. But Archbishop Bergoglio wasn't interested in protocol or prestige. He refused to live in the archbishop's mansion. Instead, he chose a small apartment. He cooked his own meals. He took the bus to work like everyone else. And most importantly, he spent much of his time walking the dusty roads of the city's Villas Miseria, the slums where Argentina's poorest families lived. These neighborhoods were often ignored by society and even by the church. Crime, unemployment, and despair were daily realities. But Archbishop Bergoglio saw something different: human dignity, no matter how hidden. He believed that the church must go to the margins, to the places of suffering, and listen. He didn't come to the slums with solutions. He came with presence. He sat with families, blessed their homes, listened to their stories, and offered comfort. He made it clear that the church was not only for the rich and powerful, it was especially for the poor and the broken-hearted. One of the most powerful aspects of his ministry was how quietly he worked. He didn't seek media attention. In fact, he often avoided interviews and cameras. His philosophy was simple: let your life speak for itself. People began calling him the Bishop of the Slums. But that wasn't an insult, it was a badge of honor. He also became known for his strong voice against injustice. During Argentina's economic crisis in the early 2000s, when millions lost their jobs and homes, Archbishop Bergoglio spoke out clearly and firmly. He criticized greed, corruption, and systems that left the poor behind. He called on both government and church leaders to do more, to be better, and to remember those who were suffering. He once said, "The church must go out into the streets, or it will become a comfortable club for the few." These words would later shape his global vision as Pope. But what made him truly unique was his understanding of mercy. He believed mercy was not weakness, but the heart of God. He often said that no one is beyond redemption, that every person deserves compassion, no matter their past. Archbishop Bergoglio's message was clear: faith without action is empty. Real Christianity means walking with the poor, standing with the excluded, and choosing love over judgment. This deep sense of mission would later make him a surprising and deeply transformative choice to lead the Catholic Church. But for now, in the streets of Buenos Aires, he continued his quiet revolution, one visit, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. Part 3: The Unexpected Pope. By the early 2010s, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio was well known within the Church in South America. But on the global stage, he remained a quiet figure. He didn't travel often. He didn't seek public attention. In fact, many people outside Argentina had never heard of him. So when Pope Benedict XVI announced his resignation in February 2013, few imagined that this humble Jesuit from Buenos Aires could be the next pope. Benedict's resignation was a surprise to the world. It was the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years, and it left the Catholic Church in a moment of uncertainty. The Vatican called for a conclave, a secret meeting of cardinals from around the world who would gather in Rome to choose a new leader for the Church. There were many expectations. Some hoped for a pope from Africa or Asia. Others thought the Church might continue with another European pope. Hardly anyone guessed that the choice would come from Latin America. Cardinal Bergoglio, at 76 years old, entered the conclave quietly. He didn't campaign. He didn't lobby for votes. But during the discussions, something about him began to stand out. His deep humility. His focus on the poor. His clear voice on justice. Other cardinals listened, and something shifted. On March 13, 2013, white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel chimney. Crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square. Cameras turned toward the famous balcony. A voice announced the words the world had been waiting for, Habemus Papam, we have a pope. And then came the name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. It was a moment of silence, followed by surprise. For the first time in history, the Catholic Church had chosen a Jesuit pope, the first ever. A pope from the Americas, also the first. A non-European pope in over 1,000 years. But perhaps even more surprising was the name he chose, Francis. It was a name never used before by any pope. And it carried deep meaning. He chose it in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, the 13th century saint known for his life of poverty, peace, and love for creation. It was a powerful signal that Pope Francis would focus on simplicity, care for the earth, and service to the poor. When he appeared on the balcony for the first time, he didn't raise his arms. He didn't speak with grandeur. Instead, he looked at the crowd and softly said, "Brothers and sisters, good evening." Then, in a quiet moment of deep humility, he bowed his head and asked the people to pray for him before he gave his first blessing. It was a moment that touched hearts all over the world. People saw something different, a man who didn't wear the papacy like a crown, but as a calling. A man who didn't arrive with pomp and power, but with quiet strength and sincerity. In just a few minutes, the world began to understand, this pope would not be like the others. He would be the pope of the people. But what would that mean in practice? That's what we'll explore next. Part 4, A Pope of the People. From the very beginning of his papacy, Pope Francis made it clear that his leadership would break traditions, not out of rebellion, but out of deep conviction. One of his first decisions as pope shocked many inside the Vatican. He refused to move into the Grand Apostolic Palace, the official residence of all popes for centuries. Instead, he chose to live in a modest guest house known as the Casa Santa Marta, where he could eat in a common dining room, talk to people, and live like any other priest. This wasn't for show. It was who he was. Even his clothing reflected his humility. While previous popes often wore rich robes and golden accessories, Pope Francis kept it simple: plain white cassocks, black shoes, and a silver cross. He wanted nothing to separate him from the people he served. His message from the start was this: the Church must be close to the people. Especially the poor, the wounded, and the forgotten. Very soon, his actions began speaking louder than words. He washed the feet of prisoners, including women and Muslims, during Holy Thursday services. He embraced people with disabilities, kissed the foreheads of the sick, and wept with victims of abuse. These gestures may seem small, but they carried powerful meaning. They reminded the world that the Church is not just an institution, it is a family. And no one should be excluded from that family. Pope Francis also brought a fresh voice to global issues. He spoke out about climate change, calling it a moral crisis and urging world leaders to act. His landmark 2015 letter, Laudato Si', became a worldwide call for environmental responsibility, reminding us that the earth is our common home and must be protected for future generations. He condemned the widening gap between rich and poor, saying that an economy that kills has no place in a just society. He criticized a culture obsessed with materialism and consumerism, and reminded people that human dignity matters more than wealth. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck in 2020, Pope Francis once again led not from a throne, but from a place of shared suffering. In one of the most hauntingly beautiful moments of his papacy, he stood alone in an empty St. Peter's Square under the rain, offering a prayer and blessing for the world. The image of his solitary figure in silence captured the pain of millions, and the deep solidarity of a spiritual leader who truly walks with his people. He also became a voice for refugees, migrants, and the displaced. He visited camps in Greece, hugged children separated from their families, and urged nations to open their hearts and borders. His message was always simple: they are not numbers. They are people. Perhaps one of his most quoted teachings is this: the shepherd must smell like the sheep. What does that mean? It means a true leader doesn't stay distant or protected. A true leader lives among the people, shares their joys and sorrows, and walks with them through life. That is the essence of Pope Francis, the Pope who listens, the Pope who acts, the Pope who prays with the world. And yet, not everyone has agreed with his approach. In the next part of our story, we'll explore the challenges, criticisms, and courage that have defined the more difficult moments of his papacy. Part 5: Challenges, Critics, and Courage. Being Pope is not just a spiritual mission, it's a position filled with enormous pressure, constant scrutiny, and deep, complex challenges. For Pope Francis, the road of leadership has not been smooth. Even with his warm smile and humble approach, he has faced powerful resistance, harsh criticism, and painful decisions. From the beginning, Pope Francis knew that reforming the Church would not be easy. For decades, the Catholic Church had been rocked by scandals, financial corruption, sexual abuse cases, and a growing disconnect between church leaders and ordinary people. Francis stepped into this role with a deep sense of responsibility to bring change, even if it meant facing strong opposition from within the Vatican itself. One of his first major actions as Pope was to reform the Vatican Bank, an institution long surrounded by secrecy and allegations of misuse. He created new oversight bodies, brought in outside experts, and demanded transparency. Some praised his efforts. Others, especially those who benefited from the old system, resisted fiercely. But financial reform was only one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Pope Francis also took bold steps to address the ongoing crisis of sexual abuse in the Church. He met with survivors. He listened to their stories. He expressed deep sorrow and asked for forgiveness on behalf of the Church. He created new procedures to hold bishops accountable and pushed for a culture of zero tolerance. Still, many felt that progress was too slow. Critics said the Church should be more aggressive in removing abusive clergy and compensating victims. Francis, though sincere, found himself caught between outrage from victims and resistance from conservative factions within the hierarchy. In addition to internal reforms, Pope Francis sparked global conversations on sensitive issues. He opened the door to welcoming LGBTQ+ people into the Church with compassion, famously saying, "If someone is gay and is seeking the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" This single sentence made headlines worldwide. To some, it was a breath of fresh air. To others, it was controversial. But Francis never claimed to change doctrine. What he changed was tone, from judgment to understanding, from exclusion to dialogue. He also encouraged deeper discussions around divorce and remarriage, the role of women in the Church, and the struggles of migrants and refugees. His encyclicals, like Fratelli Tutti, called for unity across political, religious, and cultural lines, even in an increasingly divided world. Because of this, Pope Francis became a target of criticism from both sides. Some conservatives accused him of weakening the Church's teachings. Some progressives said he didn't go far enough. In media, political groups tried to use his words to support their own agendas, sometimes misquoting him or twisting his meaning. But throughout it all, Francis stayed grounded. He kept praying. He kept serving. He kept listening. He once said, "I prefer a church that is bruised, hurting, and dirty because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and clinging to its own security." That quote perfectly reflects his courage. He understands that real change is messy, that leadership is lonely, that the path to justice is not always clear. But still he walks forward, not with fear, but with faith. In the end, Pope Francis reminds us that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes, courage is simply showing up each day, ready to listen, ready to love, ready to lead with heart. Part 6: The Legacy of Francis. As Pope Francis moves through his later years, the world continues to watch, not just what he says, but how he lives. Now in his late 80s, he walks more slowly, his body showing signs of age, yet his spirit remains strong. He continues to travel, speak, and meet with people from all walks of life. Presidents, prisoners, refugees, scientists, and children, they all find in him a listening ear and an open heart. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Pope Francis is not found in a list of achievements. It's found in the tone he has brought to the Church, one of humility, tenderness, and mercy. He has reminded the world that the role of the Church is not to sit in judgment, but to walk beside people, especially the ones who are hurting, struggling, or searching for hope. He has said again and again, "The name of God is mercy." Under his leadership, the image of the Catholic Church has begun to shift, from that of a powerful institution to that of a companion, a guide, a fellow traveler in a broken world. But legacies are not built on words alone. They are shaped by small, consistent actions, and Pope Francis has given the world many powerful moments. Standing alone in a rainy St. Peter's Square during the COVID-19 pandemic, praying for humanity. Of visiting prisoners and washing their feet. A choosing to live simply, even as the head of one of the oldest religious institutions in the world. Speaking with honesty about the challenges of the Church and the wounds that need healing. Encouraging dialogue instead of division, peace instead of conflict, care instead of indifference. These moments matter because they speak to something deeper. They show that leadership does not have to mean power and privilege. Leadership can also look like listening, like serving, like saying, "I don't have all the answers, but I'm here with you." In a time when the world is filled with noise, opinions, and division, Pope Francis offers something different: silence, reflection, and deep spiritual clarity. He invites people, of all faiths and even of no faith, to return to what matters most: love, dignity, and connection. His famous phrase, "Pray for me," repeated in nearly every speech and visit, is more than a habit. It's a reminder that no one stands above others. Not even the Pope. As the years pass, and the time comes when his papacy will end, Pope Francis will leave behind more than policies or projects. He will leave behind a way of being, a model of how to live with grace, to lead with humility, and to care deeply for others, no matter their story. And maybe that is the most powerful legacy of all. Dear listener, thank you for walking through the life of Pope Francis with us. Whether you are religious or not, his story is a beautiful example of human kindness, quiet strength, and the courage to live with purpose. If this story touched your heart or helped your English grow stronger, we invite you to subscribe to Postcard English Stories. We'll continue bringing you real stories of real people, stories that teach both language and life.